We meet on Aboriginal land that was never ceded. We pay our respects to Aboriginal elders, past, present and emerging, and we acknowledge their custodianship of the lands and waters on which we meet. Welcome to all of you. I think we'll have some great discussion today and we'll be inspired in our activism by our speakers and by each other. My name's Anna McCormack. At the outset, I'd like to sincerely thank our speakers for today, Louise, Pearl, Moira and Gillian, most of whom have travelled far to be with us. I'd also like to thank the women who've supported me to hold this event by taking on practical tasks today. Beth, Christine, Helen, Jess, Kerry, Madalika, who at the last minute became unwell and hasn't been able to make it, and Trish. Thank you all. A very brief history of the events organised under the IWD Meanjin banner. 2017, I began a Facebook page to defend women's sex-based rights against gender ideology. 2018, a few of us took back organising the International Women's Day rally and march in Brisbane from liberal socialist feminists who insisted men could be women. 2019, we began public meetings in undisclosed venues with every participant being vetted for our safety. Some, not all, public meetings have been videoed for the IWD YouTube channel, and you're welcome to have a look. 2020, I began the annual IWD Women's Liberation Conference, covering not only the harms of gender ideology, but also porn, surrogacy, the prostitution industry. 2021, we began street protests against sex self-ID 2 years before the Kelly J. Keane visit. 2023, I ceased hosting the street protests when another group agreed to take them on. I'm a retired housing worker and community development worker, a unionist through all of my working life and a union delegate through much of it. And I'm a lifelong left-wing women's liberationist. I host IWD Meanjin Brisbane events. Like our four speakers today, I'm a cancelled woman. And there's a poster that Isla McGregor from Tasmania put together of a whole bunch of cancelled Australian women. I believe she's got so many names and photographs now that she's about to do a second poster. In 2018, the Women's Abortion Rights group I coordinated, Women's Abortion Rights Campaign, was dumped from a broad coalition of abortion rights groups that had been working together for abortion decriminalisation. The decision to dump us was driven by Children by Choice, Labour for Choice, Fair Agenda and the Greens. And it was based on our support for women's sex-based rights, which all of those other groups had abandoned. Between 2018 and 2021, every Brisbane left-wing, peace and international solidarity group, including the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom and a group of retired unionists taking their cue from Brisbane union leaders, refused to engage in any discussion with women from IWD Meanjin about why the defence of women's sex-based rights is important. In 2019, at the instigation of the Women's Committee of the Queensland Council of Unions, the Electrical Trades Union banned my further use of ETU premises because I actively support women's sex-based rights. I had used their premises for years for women's meetings. In 2020, I lost my small part-time social worker job, which was a job that was ideal for a retired social worker, and I loved it. I lost it because I'm a gender-critical feminist. No reason was provided They didn't need to provide a reason. I just didn't get offered any more job contracts after one of the university's social work lecturers, I was working for a university, asked me questions about my feminism. The social work profession has clear policy opposing women's sex-based rights and safeguards for children. My feminism, like my pronouns, is sex-based. In 2022 and 2023, Queensland's Minister for Women, Shannon Fentiman, banned the inclusion of the annual Women's Liberation Conference and other IWD Meanjin events from her annual online Women's Week calendar because we oppose the state orthodoxy that men can become women and we defend children's safeguards. To my knowledge, Shannon has banned from her calendar no other women's group celebrating IWD, and none of them put on a conference. When I say I'm from the left, I'm not talking about the Labor Party and the Greens, who uphold the parliamentary system. I'm referring to groups that stand for the overthrow of patriarchal capitalism. I was a member of the Communist Party. Now, I know most people in this hall are probably critical of that perspective, but it's my background. I'm a Marxist, though it's 30 years since I was involved in Marxist study groups. The fact that my background is the far left, while others of us come from the centre or the right or the middling left, like the Labor and the Greens, and I know there are one or two members of the Labor Party here today, shows us this issue is not a left-right split. We're talking about the defence of women's sex-based spaces and protections of children's boundaries. The state and mainstream media, especially the ABC, the bosses of the trade unions and the bosses of the universities are desperate to portray our resistance to gender ideology and sex self-ID as right-wing. It isn't. I retain enough knowledge of Marxism and knowledge of working in far-left groups to know there's nothing left-wing or Marxist about denying the existence of a class of people called women and girls. There's nothing left-wing about adopting an ideology based on individualism and identitarianism rather than class. There's nothing Marxist about denying the reality of biology. There's nothing left-wing or Marxist about flipping historical materialism on its head and replacing it with ideas plucked from the anti-science. Nor is there anything left-wing or Marxist about behaving like brown shirts for unbridled capital. And that's what these so-called Marxists do when they close down our rallies and our meetings, when they force women to go underground in our political activity. So much for defending the right to assemble, the right to organise, the right to speak. These are basic rights that have always been defended by the left, but when it comes to women, the left trashes those rights. The privileged middle-class students, the sundry incels and autogynephiles who prevented women from marching for International Women's Day this year in Brisbane because the police couldn't protect us, are not representatives of a liberation movement. They do the bidding of big capital and the state. That is not what a genuine left ever does. Which group of women was the first to be forced underground by gender ideologues? Which group of women was the first to have to meet and organise in private away from the public view? Lesbians. Thank you. Lesbians were bearing the brunt of the demands of men who would be called women several decades before most of us even knew it was a thing. I only knew it was a thing in about 2016, but lesbians had been forced underground well before then. Perhaps few realised how it would spread and how its tentacles would embrace and be embraced by the state. For men who demand to be called women, lesbians are the major prize. That's why they were attacked first. Lesbians are on the front line, and they always have been. And that's why the next IWD Meanjin event will be a 2-day September conference titled Lesbian Lives, Visibility, Activism, Women's Rights. Open to both lesbians and other women, it will provide wisdoms, information and discussion essential to the development of gender-critical consciousness. In Britain and in Scotland, members of the Labour parties have formed internal organisations to defend women's sex-based rights and children's safeguards. They're open, they're upfront, they're proud, they organise, and they give heart to independent feminists involved in the same struggle. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, leading Labour Party women left their party and joined with independent women's liberationists to establish the Women's Rights Party just this year. They're open, they're upfront, and they work very hard to win back our rights. In Australia, gender-critical women in the Labour Party have been telling us for 4 or 5 years they are working behind the scenes, but they do nothing public. They don't attend the street rallies, nor the annual IWD rally, with a very small number of exceptions. They don't come to the public meetings. They don't come to the annual Women's Liberation Conference held in Brisbane. They're unlikely to attend next month's conference on the lesbian struggle. The gender-critical women in the Labour Party do appear to feel smugly superior to women's rights activists. They observe, they don't act, and yet they expect their MPs to support women's sex-based rights. Less than a fortnight ago, the British Labour leader Keir Starmer finally stated that women are adult females. That was a huge win, and it was a complete backflip. And it wouldn't have happened if there'd not been both an active independent women's movement and an active internal Labour group to defend women's sex-based rights. Change comes from the grassroots, and grassroots organising is what will win this, including in the Labour Party. So to Labour Party women, I say, it's time. It's time to be open in support of women's sex-based rights. It's time to follow your sisters from Great Britain, Scotland, New Zealand. We've been waiting for you for a long time. We're still waiting. Thank you.